Welcome to My on Mondays, an explorative approach to the possessive my through narratives, art, and sound. I'm Matt Bunk. This week, I met Mary Kay Johnson at her home on the Boise Bench. Her two cats wandered around the room during this recording, so keep an ear out for their purrs. Mary Kay is an artist, designer, and avid gardener. She's a co-founder of the Treasure Valley Community Gardens Cooperative, a member of the artist collective the Eco-Geoglyphic Observatory, and the developer behind the board game New Sum. To start us off, I asked Mary Kay, where are we?
On the depot bench in Boise. Yeah. It's sunny. It's a little muggy in here, but relatively clean with fresh cut flowers. Well, they were fresh cut this weekend from the Meridian Co-op gardeners, and a wedding house gift of some succulents there. Succulents are incredibly challenging because they're so not challenging that I forget about them. That's what they tell you to do, but I take that literally. The houseplant, like the leafy ones, water them once a week real well. I get that. There's the telltale one in the front over there that starts to curl up, and then I know to water everybody. I'm an experimental gardener, so some things work out, some things don't. I learn as I go. I learn a lot with other people. And I just wanted to backtrack a little and just speak to what I did have learned over the years, briefly. I know something about over 400 varieties of regionally adapted plants in this area, so I can grow quite a few things. But I am learning a lot with others. Yeah. And I'm totally game to try things. I like to read books and apply that. So I get a lot of ideas in the garden because nature is so wildly abundant. Like right now, the chamomile plant that I just made tea from is like exploding. It's like so huge, and I'm thrilled that it's doing so well, but I probably should have trimmed it back and hung those herbs to dry like a month ago. They're going to seed everywhere. I got a big old lemon balm right next to it. It's probably going to do the same thing here shortly. I think the best herb select, like harvesting time is a little bit of, oh my God, sweet. That is so much for, sorry, it's all your headphones. And that inspires me, the wild abundance of nature. My neighbor across the street just split off some Veronica flowers. That's one I don't know. I'm going to have to get to know it. She split it off this morning for me, and I dropped it in, and now, even though they look a little sad, they're a little traumatized, the front yard looks a lot more complete. And she needed to do that because she densely planted in order to avoid having to weed, but it means more maintenance. And so there's like a lot of intergenerational learning that happens. When I'm out there with school kids of, from either One Stone or Fairmont, that's a learning experience. Just seeing what they know, what they don't know, what they're fascinated with, observing the pattern of kids who may get very little time outside and how freaked out they are about a worm or a centipede. They're just like, oh man. And they're like kind of afraid to touch the soil after that. But when they have more time, they're like, yeah, they're holding a giant worm like a snake, which is crazy to see, but inspiring. Like a little gardener snake, really large earthworm, and they hold them the same way. And I'm just like, wow, that is unique.
Mary Kay has worked with a lot of students from the local alternative high school One Stone, and some of their ideas have helped shape her project New Sum. That's Sum, S-U-M. Mary Kay describes the board game as a call to action, a chance to imagine and create together what our shared future can become. It's a framework for discussing and developing resilient, equitable communities and addressing climate change.
And so, like, some of the stuff kids talk about in the garden is cause for thought process. And like One Stone has the program that encourages them to think very creatively. So some of the ideas in the first round of New Sum, there was a lot of seed-based cards and plant fiber-based cards, came from areas of inquiry that many students wanted to explore. And I think Teal and I were co-coaching that spring or fall. And so part of it there is you wind up preparing curricula for any direction they may want to go. They may change direction. They may not even follow that line of inquiry. But in the process, you go down like this vortex of possible research wormholes. And it applied. Like, what do we do with all this sunflower fiber that we're growing in the garden? Fascinating that we could do something. Like, I saw this wad of dried flax, and this decorative here, flax has been used for millennia for fiber, has been woven, used for a variety of things. But I have no idea how to get it from that to a fine linen cloth.
Mary Kay's work often centers on the abundance of natural material and making use of what we can see around us.
I think scarcity mindset is really prevalent right now on purpose. I think a lot of people would agree with that. Like, it seems like and in some ways, very real. We're losing options left and right. Safer work, right? Work is a theme in my cards. But like anybody who was on a career track or an educational track that had to do with regenerative, like compassionate community care, regenerative ag, anything having to do with being just and equitable human beings to one another, all of that just got, directly targeted, and federal funding got cut. That doesn't mean that there's no options, but it definitely reduces work options in those fields. And then they dramatically increase the ICE budget. And there's a lot of speculation around that, but that gives like this kind of zero-sum scenario, right? I've got morbid curiosity about what new jobs are going to be cropping up in the next 6 months. And what's going to happen with labor, what's going to happen with food systems. I think all of us have different areas that we're paying attention to that these events of the last 7 months are making us aware of. Sorry, I get directly political, but it's kind of that kind of time, So abundance and scarcity. So there's this scarcity mindset, and in some very real ways, options for all of us are narrowing. And at the same time, when we're like gathered in person in our communities, there can be this abundant exchange, say, of the plants that my neighbor just shared with me from across the street. There can be an abundance of validation that we're all still here, we're all still breathing, at least here in our groups maybe, but that's not true for everybody, right? That's like these things are happening to other, like people are getting abducted, and there are some scary things happening, but there's also like social cohesion happening in those places, and people are standing up. All the game sessions, it seemed like, or the vast majority of them up until this year, seemed to have like these, like they would have wonderful scenarios, wonderful solutions that would come up in gameplay, but a lot of them counted on grant funding, at least to start. And that's, I think, the way that we think about a lot of things, or that we did think about a lot of things. In April, when I was in the Placemakers Union residency as a guest with Newsome, I added an element to the project card. There's a project card so that players can like keep track of the cards they're drawing, keep track of the conversations they're having, keep track of the goal they started with and how that might change. But I added a little note about like what, I had a little like game mechanic about grants and what grant are you missing, and nobody filled any of that out. And then nobody even brought grants up in the scenario or the visioning phases. Like they just didn't in the course of 4 games, not even the kids. I played with one stone. We talked about grants a little bit in that particular game. We had a special session because they just were awarded a grant from the city of Boise, the Climate Youth Action Award. And so that's great. And it was so weird working on that one because I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I don't want to add any pressure, and I hope I didn't mention it aloud to them, but I talked about it with Jordy, their coach. I was like, man, this is hyper precious right now. Like, we might not see this kind of a thing again. Hopefully we do. Hopefully that stuff exists, but like that just upped the stakes on all of this project work that they're doing. And we can't put that on the kids, but it's like, ooh. So I like to read a lot of books or listen to a lot of audiobooks, like when I'm driving or when I'm gardening, when I'm doing anything with my hands. Audiobooks are the best, or podcasts. And I was listening to a book on en route to Portland called What If We Get Things Right, or What If We Get It Right by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Taylor. Dang good book, really good. I heard about it in a podcast she was on with Adrienne Marie Brown, and they were talking about, they were in an interview right around the election and the election results, and she was coming to the end of this book tour for this book. And this book is full of so many great stats, so much good data. It talks about it, like in each chapter, it'll start off with 10 problems and 10 things we're already doing right, and then areas we can explore. And the way she put the book together was like a series of interviews that she did, like podcast style. And then the book actually included all those people talking about, like speaking from their experience in the areas that she was exploring. So time banks were mentioned a couple of times in there. And then I came across an author named Peter Block, who's known for a couple of different things. Building community is one thing, and he talks about time banks in greater detail. But time banking seems a lot like barter system, but with a unit of measurement that is maybe digital, or maybe tracks some other way. It doesn't have paper script, I don't believe. So I've been playing with that one because it doesn't solve all the problems. But when we start thinking about what we can trade in terms of our labor, and if we look at like even the way we spend our time, the gifts that we give, it's like a gift of our experience and the skills that we cultivate. When we start to look at it like that, then a lot more people can also be involved, and a lot of invisible labor can suddenly be surfaced. And we can even, I think in What If We Get It Right, they talked about awarding time bank credits to people participating in public utility hearings, because of course those things are scheduled during the work week, so a lot of people can't go. But if we are like acting in community to reward the individuals that can go, maybe we can be more active citizens and becoming more conscious citizens. It's another chapter in that book. So the book had an effect on the game a little bit in just this last, like this round, and I've only played the game once since I read the book, maybe twice actually. So that kind of thinking is a different sort of abundance, but I think it's an interesting response for creating alternatives to scarcity mindset, and also creating community cohesion at a time when there is the message pretty constantly of polarization and fear. One of the functions that works in that is people get together in potlucks, and then they're thinking about their gifts that they can offer and they can trade for this unit of measurement. And they get to know what some of the other skills and offerings, gifts, experiences that other community members have. And I think the phrase transactional relationship has come up a little bit in a negative sense in some like podcasts or radio or whatever. This is transactional. But I would also say it's honoring people's time, energy, life energy, talent, skill, uplifting one another. Yeah, I mean, when I think about people who've been involved in one volunteer activity after another for years, and there's so many things that so many compassionate, hearted people are responding to, that group of people in so many different sectors has been maybe pulling a bigger load to like fill in the void that our system has continued to create. Now that void will only grow. And I'm not sure what people are thinking is going to happen, who is going to step up and continue filling in that void to make sure things run. But yeah, I don't think we can keep counting on the volunteers and the systems of donated time, effort, and funding. So one aspect of a more functional community would be being realistic about who we're counting on to do work, who we're counting on to fund things, how we're even like contextualizing funding itself.
An interesting example of a time banking system Mary Kay has been thinking about is the Ithaca Hours.
The Ithaca Hours, Ithaca, New York, is a system of localized currency that was developed in the early 90s by a dude named Paul Glover. I'm actually wearing the Philadelphia Orchard Project, another project that guy started. That dude was like, all kinds of stuff. I wonder where he is now. But he got inspired by the script of the Great Depression. During the Great Depression, you had all these able-bodied people around, but they couldn't work. And so chambers of commerce, cities, towns started to develop their own systems of currency to keep people just interacting, keep things flowing. In the midst of that chaos, you can imagine what people began maybe accepting a script for, say, rent. This guy Glover in the 90s in Ithaca got hit super hard, like a lot of places on the East Coast, with the outsourcing of labor, like single employers being mass employers and then up and leaving. Ithaca got hit hard. And I guess the community was very amenable and open to coming up with some different ways. And there was people that, like, on average, use the Ithaca hour system for like up to 8 years, which is wild. You got people accepting it for rent, so landlords accepting partial payments for rent, lots of business owners, lots of restaurants, movie theaters, video rental places. This was the 90s. Got the local federal or the local credit union involved, and they were accepting Ithaca hours to a certain point. I think almost everybody seemed to be on board, according to his hometown currency, I think is what it's called. It's on archive.org. I had to go looking. I bought the print copy at one point, but it was my late 20s and I never sat still to read it. It was visually rich too, but so funny. But I found it on archive, and I found a text version, and I had my computer read it to me because my hands were busy and I couldn't sit still. It's terrible, but but he talks about all kinds of stuff that goes beyond even what I'm reading about so far in time banks. I can't investigate time banks too much without contacting a person who's running a time bank. There's like 217 of them in one system called Our World, started with an HOR .org, and they're all over the world. But I plan to do like an informational interview with one at some point to see if I can get access to their system and see what people are time banking with. I think I lost where I was going with that. The unit of measurement. I think I just wanted to emphasize that there was a system where it got to the point. It got so chaotic that people in the town gathered around similar interests, similar needs, and responded to the challenge in a proactive way. I would hope that we see that in more parts of our communities. Like, we see the chaos. It's harder though because there's a lot of chaos, so it's like, what part of the chaos do we pick to see and then respond to with a sense of innovation and altruism?
A few years ago, Mary Kay actually visited Ithaca and had the chance to see if the currency was still accepted in town.
And then we went to visit that credit union because I still had the print copy in my hand, actually. I had it with me, which was cool. And there was like one under glass on the counter. And they were like, yeah, we still technically carry it, but we don't see a lot of it in circulation anymore. And I found an analysis article online, and there was a couple things that went sideways with it. One, the print currency went the way of electronic banking. So because so much went to ATMs and went into, electronic forms of exchange, this paper script system didn't hold as much weight. The other thing was Paul Glover championed the idea and then was the one who kept it going with all the momentum. But he had quite an amount of currency in circulation. Some folks who were counting on it for the majority of their income. And I, having visited Ithaca briefly, I would say there was a lot of fixed income folks in the area. So when you think about that, it's an incredible thing to have more members of the community that may otherwise feel like there's not a way to participate in the community suddenly be able to do so through tutoring, cooked meals, or other forms of skill share. There's been quite the resurgence of late in handcrafts, mending, weaving, hand dyeing, all these things that are a return to the algorithmic, an abandonment of the electronic. And I think there's a certain maybe deep, smart sense of self-protection with that So I don't have the capacity right now to take on another project and see the ones through that I'm very committed to, but I'm going to keep talking about the hour system because I think there's something really cool about that. He also talks about values and some of the art that they had on the bills, included like the First Nations people and included people who do the labor. So like, uplifting those and being like universal in how they did it. Also, they had serial numbers on there and they used local cattail fiber in the paper. Fascinating. So it couldn't be counterfeit. He was like really on top of that. Really fascinating. So he was actually in dialogue with the Treasury, the IRS, and another couple of groups. And so they weren't ever in trouble. Like the IRS never came down on them. With this administration, that could be a different story. Who knows? Because I think this administration's trying to start their own currency and it's like crypto something or other. Like crypto sounded great to begin with for a lot of people, but it's never been accessible for the vast majority of people. I was involved in a bartering system that was trying to get a little bit structured in Tacoma for a couple of years. So I did explore this with academic enthusiasm for a minute in 2014 or so.
Talking so much about time and labor hours as currency, I was curious about Mary Kay's perspective on land ownership and use.
Well, here's a perspective. It might feel a little abstract. Land and the whole concept of property is very troublesome and increasingly so, now. But if we abstract and look back down any one of our lineages, any part of any one of our lineages, we're indigenous to somewhere. So take Europe, I descend from parts of Western Europe. And between the 1300s and the 1900s, there was this period of time called the enclosure period. And that was all about losing commonly held land. Colonization of Europe happened in waves and waves and waves. And there was different systems in different places of getting along equitably and living with the land. I'm not saying there wasn't war, there wasn't, contest, there wasn't raids, there wasn't slavery. There were all of those things. But we're in a period of time right now where we've got a greater sense of awareness about systems of egalitarianism, systems that are possible. And we've got all these tools at our immediate, within our reach for a lot of us. And, a lot of efforts to increase accessibility have been happening. So I feel like we're in this window of time where we could work with that older understanding about the importance of those commonly held spaces. Commonly held in Europe, it was pasture land, it was the woods, it was the shared gardens, and people would convene and grow a lot of food together. When people work together, they can do more in a shorter period of time, and it can actually be enjoyable. It's kind of rad. So that's a perspective on land, living with it and not acting with it like it is a sense of property. However, I navigate in the present day, and with community gardens specifically, there's different land ownership and land use agreements on all of them, and I respect that, But I think about the history. I think about the history of and what that might have felt like over the course of centuries to lose, say, the woods to the kings and the clergy, and suddenly a thing like poaching becomes a thing where, say people totally counted on hunting, but if they count on hunting and then there's new policy, no, you can't hunt here, and then, oh, sorry, yeah, we're the clergy's going to take over that part. It was the clergy in part in some places. And then it was the merchant class also coming up. And they're oh, we got a more efficient way of farming. We're going to farm this one crop and no one's going to go hungry. And then they lost the commons for these things. And they got it. It wasn't the people were they did uprise. But it was a period of time when there wasn't a ton of print. And the way that the history has been recorded is really interesting. I did an analysis of it for a workshop. in 2024 because I got mildly obsessed with this topic, but around food systems. So I think it's about land, but it's also about food security and food sovereignty. That's like a food sovereignty that I could probably like find some evidence of lineal alignment with, but also like I think it's been a long time, maybe several generations since some of us have experienced hunger or seen, but we all saw like the empty shelves during COVID. Maybe they were the empty ramen noodle shelves. That was wild. I'm over the produce section. Like, how can we have so much produce? But like other more rational people were like, yeah, that's the stuff that keeps, dude, and it's the stuff people know how to cook. But also like learning how to like our lifestyles don't even accommodate working with raw food a lot of the time, because it totally means you're going to spend a couple of hours processing food sometimes, maybe several times in a given summer. But I think about it in terms of how we look at land, how we share it, how we consider sharing it or not, how this concept of property could really hog tie us here shortly if we don't maybe try to shift perspectives a little bit, or look back or look forward, or look to people who've been doing it a lot longer, like sharing resources and sharing land with integrity, or would have, had they not had their land taken from them so many times over. One instance of land back actually was also discussed in that What If We Get It Right? And it was talking about just like the BLM lands, just like the public lands that we're talking about. A lot of those are traditional homelands of indigenous peoples all over this country. And first, those folks have been here for time immemorial. And if so when you think about it like that, they lived in balance. They have lived in balance with these places for that long, however long that is. My ancestors came over 4, 5, 6 generations ago, the 1800s, different points, displaced from the land that they knew how to cultivate on, and they brought with them all these practices that didn't work in these places, didn't work in the arid high desert necessarily, and so their crops failed for a while and whatever. In those earlier times in those places, according to like journal accounts of my relatives, people were equitable. The indigenous people of those areas were equitable. I mean, there was already the tension and the narrative was rising. That is, what we consider unjust, but there was an equity there. And so I don't know what equity looks like. Integrity, though, integrity to the land, integrity to all beings, that's integrity. In our current culture now, I wouldn't say that it's designed with integrity in mind.
My on Mondays is brought to you by Ming Studios, a contemporary art space and international artist residency program in Boise, Idaho. This episode is part of a series on place and home called Where We Are. For more information about Ming's programming, or if you'd like to participate in My on Mondays, you can visit our website at mingstudios.org. We'll be back next Monday.